Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and least talked about chapters of World War II history. Picture this. It's 1943, the height of the war battles rage across Europe and the Pacific. And yet, across the United States, from the deserts of Arizona to the farmlands of Iowa and the pine forests of Maine, nearly 500,000 German soldiers are quietly living, working, and even making friends with the very people whose country they were sent to fight. No, this isn't alternate history or some wild conspiracy theory. This actually happened. Between 1942 and 1946, the United States held more than 400,000 German prisoners of war in over 500 camps scattered across nearly every state in the nation. What happened inside those camps is one of the strangest and most surprising stories of the entire war. Let's rewind to late 1942. America had just entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and Allied forces were pushing into North Africa. As US and British troops advanced, they began capturing German soldiers by the tens of thousands. Mostly from Rommel's Afrika Korps, the problem. Britain was already bursting at the seams. The Blitz had devastated cities, food and fuel were scarce, and the small island was already home to over 150,000 Axis prisoners. It simply couldn't handle any more. So the British turned to their ally across the Atlantic. Can you take them? The United States, with its vast land and resources, agreed. By the end of 1942, ships that had carried American soldiers to war returned home filled with captured German troops. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Men who had been trying to kill Americans just months before were now being delivered safely to American ports. The US Army faced a massive logistical challenge. How do you house, feed, and guard nearly 500,000 enemy soldiers? The solution: spread them out. Camps were established across the nation. Repurposed fairgrounds, old civilian conservation corps sites, and hastily built compounds ringed with barbed wire. By 1945, over 500 POW camps existed in 46 states. Only Nevada and North Dakota had none. Some were massive, holding over 5,000 prisoners. Others were tiny satellite camps tucked behind rural farms. Chances are, if you grew up near an old army base, there was a POW camp nearby. And you might not even know it. So what was life actually like inside these camps? Honestly, it might surprise you. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs had to be treated humanely. That meant adequate food, shelter, medical care, and protection from violence. And America took those rules seriously. US officials knew that how they treated German POWs would set the standard for how American prisoners would be treated overseas. The result? Many German POWs lived far better in American camps than they had as soldiers in the field. Each camp was its own small town, complete with barracks, kitchens, recreation fields, and even theaters. Prisoners received 3 full meals a day, often the same rations given to US soldiers. During wartime rationing, some civilians even complained that the Germans were eating better than they were. Camps organized soccer matches, orchestras, theater productions, and libraries. Prisoners published German-language newsletters, built furniture, and painted murals. Some even started universities within the camps, teaching courses in math, engineering, and literature. A former POW once said that his years in an American camp were the best of his life. For many young Germans, especially those who had grown up under Nazi propaganda, it was their first real glimpse of democracy, freedom, and fair treatment. But let's be clear, they were still prisoners. There were guard towers, searchlights, and roll calls. They couldn't leave, and they didn't know when or if they'd ever go home. Yet compared to the brutality of German or Japanese camps, their experience was almost surreal. America was facing a massive labor shortage. Millions of men were overseas, and farms and factories were desperate for hands. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of able-bodied Germans were sitting behind barbed wire. The solution was obvious. Let them work. Under international law, enlisted prisoners could be required to work, so long as it wasn't war-related labor, and so the POW labor program was born. Every morning, trucks loaded with German prisoners would roll out of camps and scatter to nearby farms, sawmills, and factories. By evening, they'd return, often sunburned, dirty, and tired, but fed and paid. Their jobs varied by region. In Texas and California, they picked cotton and citrus. In the Midwest, they harvested wheat and corn. In Florida, they worked in canneries and sugar mills. Skilled POWs became carpenters, mechanics, and even construction workers, helping repair bridges and roads. For their labor, they were paid a small wage, about 80 cents a day, equivalent to an American private's pay. They could spend it in camp canteens on snacks, cigarettes, or writing supplies. Farmers, at first skeptical, quickly realized these men were hard-working and disciplined. Many wrote letters to the government begging to keep the German workers even after the war. But this story isn't without irony or injustice. In many communities, German POWs were treated better than black Americans. There are photos of German prisoners being served in restaurants where African-American soldiers in uniform were refused service. It's a painful contrast that exposed deep racial hypocrisy in wartime America, a hypocrisy that helped fuel the early civil rights movement. Bringing enemy soldiers into American towns was bound to cause tension. At first, people were afraid or angry. Farmers didn't want Nazis on their land. Parents worried about safety. But over time, something remarkable happened. Humanity broke through. Farmers realized these enemies were mostly young men, no older than their sons. They worked hard, were polite, and often grateful. Some spoke English. Others taught locals a few German words. They sang songs while they worked and fixed farm machinery with precision. By Christmas, families were bringing them homemade pies. Some POWs were invited to share holiday dinners or Sunday church services. In a few towns, entire communities came to see them as our Germans. There were heartwarming moments everywhere in Texas. Townspeople donated blood to save a sick prisoner's life. In Wisconsin, POWs played soccer against local teams. In Colorado, they helped fight wildfires. Of course, romance sometimes blossomed, though forbidden by law. A handful of American women fell in love with German POWs, leading to stories that sound straight out of a movie. Not everyone welcomed them, though. Some Americans stayed bitter, and there were occasional fights or escape attempts. A few prisoners slipped away, but nearly all were quickly recaptured. Many didn't even bother trying. Where would they go? They were thousands of miles from home, surrounded by strangers, and most had realized by then that they were safer here than in a collapsing Germany. Inside the camps, not everything was peaceful. The US military tried to separate die-hard Nazis from regular soldiers, but it wasn't easy. Within the barbed wire, the same ideological battles that tore Germany apart played out again. Fanatical Nazi prisoners sometimes bullied or even murdered those who spoke against Hitler. The worst case occurred at Camp Tonkawa, Oklahoma, where a prisoner accused of collaboration was beaten to death. 5 of his fellow inmates were later tried and executed for the crime. American officials eventually introduced re-education programs, films, books, and lectures about democracy, freedom, and the horrors of Nazism. Some prisoners were skeptical, but others were deeply moved, especially when shown footage of concentration camps after liberation. These camps became strange microcosms of Germany itself, filled with debate, reflection, and, for many, transformation. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the war was over. But for the POWs, the waiting began. America had no immediate plan to send them home. Germany was a wreck, its cities flattened, its railways destroyed, and millions homeless. The Allies feared sending hundreds of thousands of men back into that chaos, so the prisoners stayed, working on farms and in factories for another year or more. They listened to the radio, received Red Cross letters from home, and wondered what their families had endured. Repatriation finally began in 1946. One by one, the same ships that had carried them across the Atlantic years earlier brought them home. Many left with mixed emotions, relieved to return, but sad to leave the country that had treated them with unexpected kindness. The last German POW left US soil in 1948. Some would later return as immigrants, scholars, or even tourists, revisiting the sites of their captivity and the Americans who had befriended them. The story of German POWs in America is one of the most remarkable examples of humanity amid the brutality of war. It proved that compassion doesn't have to stop at the enemy line. It also helped reshape post-war relations between Germany and the United States. Many former POWs became advocates for democracy, crediting their time in America as the moment their worldview changed forever. The legacy lives on in the physical remnants, old guard towers, weathered camp foundations, local museums preserving letters and photographs. In small towns from Alabama to Oregon, locals still tell stories of the Germans who worked the fields. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know which hidden World War II stories you'd like to explore next.